Alcohol addiction through the lens of habit and the dopamine system. Joe is a pensioner and lives alone in a small apartment in a mining town. He is an alcoholic and can barely make ends meet on his small pension. He barely has enough money for rent, drinks, cigarettes, and a little food. When he started treatment for alcoholism, he admitted that his biggest trigger is shopping. When he gets to the checkout, there is always a bottle of vodka in his basket. He says that he is not even aware of how and when he takes the bottle from the shelf and puts it in the basket. He says that he puts it there subconsciously. It sounds very stupid, but let's see if it could be possible. His story did not end well. The same day that he was discharged early from the psychiatric hospital due to the flu, he went to buy food. As always, the bottle ended up in the basket and Joe's emptied it immediately. Despite this, he returned to the hospital 2 days later. He was rejected due to a relapse. He was not left to his own devices, but had to wait for another form of treatment at another facility. Alcohol addiction is often misunderstood as a simple matter of excessive drinking or poor self-control. In reality, it is a deeply rooted condition shaped by history, psychology, and neurobiology. Addiction does not consist merely of consuming alcohol, rather, the repeated need for intoxication gradually transforms into a habit embedded in the brain's survival systems. Even when a person becomes consciously aware of their addiction and genuinely wants to stop, automatic brain mechanisms can overpower rational decision-making. To understand why this happens, we must look at how habits form, how the dopamine system becomes dysregulated, and how ancient brain structures override conscious intention. Historical perspectives on alcohol and habit. Alcohol has accompanied human societies for thousands of years. Archaeological evidence shows that fermented beverages were used in early civilizations for ritual, social bonding, and emotional relief. Historically, alcohol was not viewed as a drug but as food, medicine, or as spiritual aid. This long-standing cultural acceptance shaped the human relationship with alcohol as something familiar, comforting, and socially integrating. As societies evolved, alcohol became embedded in daily life, celebrations, religious rituals, business negotiations, and coping with hardship. The concept of addiction as a medical or psychological disorder is relatively recent. For centuries, excessive drinking was explained in moral terms: weak character, lack of discipline, or sin. This moral framework obscured the biological reality. Repeated alcohol use alters the brain in predictable ways, especially through habit formation and changes in the dopamine system. The historical normalization of alcohol created fertile ground for addiction to develop quietly. When a behavior is culturally accepted, the brain does not label it as dangerous. Instead, it becomes part of routine life, making the transition from use to habit easier and less visible. Psychological mechanisms, from coping to compulsion. Psychologically, alcohol addiction often begins as a coping strategy. Alcohol reduces anxiety, numbs emotional pain, and temporarily relieves stress. For the brain, this relief is highly significant. Humans are wired to repeat behaviors that reduce discomfort or increase safety. Over time, drinking becomes associated not with pleasure, but with regulation, regulating emotions, thoughts, and even identity. At this stage, alcohol use shifts from a conscious choice to an automatic response. Stress, conflict, boredom, or emotional pain trigger the urge to drink, often before conscious thought has time to intervene. This is the hallmark of habit, behavior executed with minimal awareness, driven by learned neural pathways rather than deliberate reasoning. Even when a person intellectually understands that alcohol is harming them, psychological insight alone is rarely enough to stop the behavior. This is because addiction does not primarily reside in the rational parts of the brain. It is rooted in older, faster systems designed to ensure survival. The dopamine system and habit formation. At the center of addiction lies the dopamine system. Dopamine is often mistakenly called the pleasure chemical, but its true function is learning and motivation. Dopamine teaches the brain what is important to repeat. When a behavior reliably reduces stress or discomfort, dopamine marks it as valuable for survival. Alcohol artificially stimulates dopamine release in the brain's reward pathways, particularly in the mesolimbic system. Initially, this produces feelings of relief or mild euphoria. Over time, however, the brain adapts. Natural sources of dopamine, such as social connection, achievement, or physical activity, become less effective. The brain's baseline dopamine activity decreases, leading to emotional flatness, lack of motivation, and inner restlessness. As a result, alcohol is no longer used to feel good, it is used to feel normal. This is a critical shift. The dopamine system has become dysregulated, and the brain now depends on alcohol to maintain emotional equilibrium. At this point, drinking is no longer a choice, it is a necessity created by altered neurochemistry. Repeated activation of this system strengthens habit loops. Environmental cues, time of day, places, emotions, or routines, automatically trigger craving. The brain no longer waits for conscious approval. The habit runs on its own. The crocodile brain and loss of conscious control. To explain why conscious decisions fail in addiction, it is helpful to use the metaphor of the crocodile brain. This term refers to the most primitive brain structures, including the brainstem and parts of the limbic system, responsible for survival functions such as fight, flight, feeding, and reproduction. These systems evolved long before rational thought and operate at lightning speed. When the urge for intoxication arises, the crocodile brain interprets it as a survival need. In that moment, it suppresses activity in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning, planning, and moral judgment. Thinking literally becomes harder. This is why people describe feeling as if their hand reaches for the bottle on its own, or why they find themselves taking a detour to a bar without having consciously decided to do so. From the brain's perspective, this makes sense. If alcohol has been learned as a reliable way to reduce distress, the crocodile brain treats access to alcohol as urgent. It does not evaluate long-term consequences. It does not consider values, promises, or intentions. Its only goal is immediate regulation. This explains why insight alone does not cure addiction. A person can know everything about the harms of alcohol and still relapse. In moments of craving, conscious thought is temporarily overridden. The habit is executed before awareness catches up. Addiction as habit, not just substance use. Understanding addiction as habit rather than mere substance use changes how we approach recovery. The need for intoxication becomes embedded in daily routines, emotional responses, and identity. Even after detoxification, habit circuits remain intact. This is why relapse can occur months or years later, often triggered by stress or emotional overload. The brain remembers. Dopamine pathways do not erase easily. Without new habits and new ways of regulating emotions, the old pathways reactivate under pressure. Addiction, therefore, is not cured by abstinence alone. Abstinence removes the substance, but it does not automatically rewire the brain. Implications for recovery. Recovery requires more than willpower. It involves retraining the brain at multiple levels. Biochemical, allowing the dopamine system to gradually recover through time, healthy routines, and reduced artificial stimulation. Psychological, learning new ways to cope with stress, emotions, and discomfort. Behavioral, replacing old habits with new, conscious routines. Somatic, regulating the nervous system so the crocodile brain no longer perceives constant threat. Most importantly, recovery requires understanding. When people realize that addiction is not a moral failure but a learned survival response, shame decreases and responsibility becomes possible. Responsibility does not mean blame, it means participating in the process of rewiring the brain. Alcohol addiction is the result of historical normalization, psychological learning, and biochemical changes in the dopamine system. What begins as relief becomes habit, and habit becomes compulsion. Even when awareness is present, ancient brain systems can override conscious choice, making addiction feel automatic and unstoppable. Yet the same brain that learned addiction can also learn recovery. Habits can be reshaped, dopamine balance can be restored, and conscious choice can gradually regain strength. Understanding these mechanisms is not only educational, it is liberating. It replaces judgment with insight and opens the door to lasting change.